All right, cool. Looks like we're live. Welcome back to Conversations from the Underground. My name is Eric. This is Brad. What's going on, man?
Oh man, busy. Seems it's been a while. Been what 2 weeks now since we've.
Yeah.
What's funny
Now,
is
but
what's funny is because I remember last time we got there real late and we are like, yeah, we're getting at it hard, dedicated. Ain't never miss nothing. We got to do it no matter what. And then boom, right the next week missed.
yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. And the last one, it ran a bit longer than we normally tend to
Hmm.
operate. We try to keep it at least about an hour or under. And no matter what, we're always recording to drop the episode on Monday. Every
Right.
Monday, you're going to get an episode. However, life happens, things happen.
Hmm.
And man, the past 2 weeks have been kind of tough for us to kind of, circle that square. But, regardless of that, we're here. So,
We're
and yeah,
back.
man, it's busy. We're busy. I haven't had any exams yet, but I think I'm switching things up to where I might consider, um, like adjusting the parameters of the exam. Normally, I tend to cover about 4 chapters and then take an exam. But spring goes so fast, and I'm not sure why. Maybe because of the holidays or whatever. But I'm thinking of doing 3 chapters, take an exam, just to get that first one out of the way, and then we'll
Yeah,
go from there.
they got an exam I think scheduled not this week but next week for me. And it's already like late. It'll be late February. I feel like we're just gonna get them tested over what we've covered. We'll just see how far we get. And
Right.
hard when you get a whole week off in the middle of the semester because of cold.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. And we
You
got to make
know,
adjustments for that.
that was tough. Um, but yeah, man. I mean, besides all the crazy death and destruction that's been going on in my life. It just so happens that I think yesterday, man, I would go so far as to say, well, it's not yesterday, Thursday night is what it was. Now, yeah, Thursday night, it was probably the best lecture I've ever been able to deliver. Um, so the good people is at Northwest campus. I got there about 2 hours early and got a tour of their horticultural program.
Hmm.
Um, and I just came up. I mean, because everything's been so busy, I thought about the lecture a little bit, maybe 30, 40 minutes. I started to write something down, didn't, and then finally was just like, I'm just going to go with it, wing it. And kind of came up with this little prop idea on the way there. And it turned out to be an amazing lecture, man. It was a really interesting thing they got going over there. It's called STEM So What Conference.
Hmm.
Um, and it was close to 100 students there, some of which were STEM majors, some of which weren't. Um, but the dude who just get introduced the horticultural program, and then he just let me talk about cannabis. So it was good. I stayed for probably an hour uh,
Hmm.
afterwards with the Q&A. Um, had some pretty cool discussions. Northwest campus is pretty nice. Pretty,
Yeah, yeah, but everything's from a frame of reference, so that
yeah,
means.
I mean they're going through the same crap as we are. They about to lose
Oh,
their
are they?
office, and all that. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
but it looks pretty nice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, that implies southeast looks kind of like a long hallway.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. But so, what was the connection with horticulture? Because I don't really get that. And then cannabis, like, what was the?
They have a small horticultural program there. Um,
But what is that? What does that entail? Like,
Horticulture is just like urban agricultural gardening,
okay.
food production, farming in such a way as to kind of like be connected with like so if you have a garden, it's just a plot, right? And you grow
Hmm.
food. But horticulture, and you like grow food and the pathways and walk around and kind of make it part of the landscape type of thing, right? And I'm interested in permaculture, which is another step further, which is more like utilizing resources around you to grow things.
Okay.
And he didn't tell me pretty much why this year they chose cannabis as their topic, but I just got in touch with this dude through Southside Community Garden at one point.
Mm.
Um, and he's an adjunct there. And a couple months ago, he just asked me if I wanted to come give a presentation, since the topic was going to be about cannabis.
Mm.
And I said, yeah. I went over there. I didn't really know what to expect, but it was a lot of students who I think were paying attention. I don't know. It was
Well,
just
what made you feel that it was a good lecture?
man. I mean, um, so I started it off basically like, I know, I don't know how long this is going to take. Whatever, we ain't got no clocks around here, so like,
Mm.
what we got? Somebody, y'all start setting your alarms for 7:12, and let's just see if I can go. And once we hear the alarm start ringing, we'll stop and get some Q&A. And it just so happened, like right when I made a last point, it was a small pause, and I was thinking about talking again, and then boom, the alarm went
Yeah.
off. But there was just a lot of engagement in terms of listening, laughing, getting really into the conversation, um, and then a lot of good questions. I mean, sometimes
What
you think
what,
people coming in there with different ideas, but it's almost like when you get going, that whole entire room was on the same wavelength, and what I was saying. Some of which maybe didn't think they'd be on that wavelength when they came in. If that makes any sense.
mhm. Yeah, what were some of the good questions, or
Well,
what was an interesting like segment or conversation or
I,
angle
I
that you were
started it off.
taking?
Have I showed you that that sweater that my mom made me? That
I
kind of
think I
like
have,
crochet,
but is it? Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Does it look like a poncho of sorts, but it's a
kind of.
crochet?
Yeah. So she made another one of those for me out of 100% hemp, right?
No, okay.
And I wore that. It's baggy as all get out. And then I wore these like cannabis socks. You know them socks I got with the cannabis leaf
Oh
on
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I went in there and I kind of was like, I told them all the stuff that I do, whatever. And then I was like, I got this cannabis hoodie on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kept saying cannabis hoodie. It's made out of full cannabis, and how kind of like impractical it was, how much it costed her, and all this other stuff. And then I pull up these socks, and I'm like, see this hemp leaf right here on these socks? Yeah, you know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, just to kind of like mix them up with those two words, and then I kind of
But
backtracked and was like, if y'all knew something about this plant, then you probably would have been thinking, well, that's a hemp shirt, not a cannabis shirt, or that may be a marijuana or a cannabis leaf, but I wouldn't think hemp. And the whole point was to sort of like get people to see how these words for different people have different meaning, right? And why is it that when we think of hemp, we think of certain industrial productive things? When we think of like marijuana, we think of like, a recreational type of thing, or something bad or something like this, or cannabis may be more of a medical thing. And then I just kind of brought it all together to sort of talk about where the origins of these words, cannabis, um, indica, cannabis sativa, come from, and how much of our understanding of this plant is predicated on um, how societies invest the things they use with meaning, right? Um,
mhm.
and when two different societies interact with each other with different investments of meaning for the same looking thing, particularly something like cannabis, which is this multi-purpose plant that could be used for all these different things. So people in different societies use it for different purposes. And when they encounter each other using them for these different purposes, it causes strife. And I made this argument, this Protestant work ethic concept of hemp as this productive, strong plant juxtaposed to this, Indian exotic stuff, kind of where you need to start.
Hmm. You know, is there any other like product out there, as you mentioned, that's being used in two different cultures that is as controversial as marijuana?
As controversial, definitely not. And there's certainly not very many.
Like, because off top, if it's controversial, we'd probably. I'm lending myself to another drug, maybe something like, opium.
Mhm.
But is opium used in other cultures differently than it's used in the United States? Or, I mean,
Yeah,
it seems unique. Like marijuana is in a very unique, in a unique crosshairs for maybe like American traditions versus American appetites or desires. Like traditionally, we're told that this is, or we shouldn't engage in this. However, it's abundantly clear many people engage in it. Um, is there anything? I was trying to think like if there's any other substance out there, um, where we see this type of cultural conflict.
yeah, I think you do. I mean, like, so for example, the Chinese smoked opium when they came. The United States drank opium, and so there were different meanings behind smoking opium versus orally administrating it.
Hmm.
But with cannabis, not only are there different meanings behind its psychoactive uses, but there are societies that use it for rope, have nothing to do with getting high, right? And
Right.
then there's societies who use it for getting high. And that's what's key about cannabis, because it's a multi-purpose plant, because it can be used for so many different things.
Mm.
You see all these shades of meaning shrouding it everywhere it goes. You don't see very many plants like that. Plants have been like sugar, for example. Sugar used to be like a preservative. It was a medicine. Then it went from um, something that you just douse nasty food with to protect from it. Then it became a spice. Then it became like a staple. So in that regard, you got commodities that mean different things,
Mm.
but they're still being consumed. It's kind of the same way. But because cannabis is so versatile, that's lended it to so much controversy over the years,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, I remember this interview, for this person dealing with drug addiction, and she had mentioned that she was addicted to cocaine, and the interviewer kind of, I don't want to say corrected, but maybe presumed that it was actually crack. And
Mm,
she's like, and the interviewer goes, "Do you mean you're addicted to crack?" And she goes, "No, it's cocaine. But they're the same thing. It's just," and the way she presented it was, so we see that if there's a multitude of uses for a substance, those uses could have different meanings. And in the case of her using cocaine, she says it's not terribly different from crack in that cocaine, the method of usage is through the nose, whereas the other one is smoked.
right.
And that if you use it differently, it does carry different
Oh,
meaning for
certainly.
some strange reason. If the method in which you are,
Route
I
of
guess,
administration. Yeah, the route of
yeah,
admin.
yeah, there you go. The route of administration. There you go. And then that carries a different meaning too.
Certainly, because it
Which
hits your system a lot quicker. If you're inhaling
which
something
which
through
one? Which one hits quicker?
lungs,
Not that I
yeah,
know or need to know, but okay.
yeah. If you're inhaling something through your lungs, it's going to get into your system much quicker, anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, as opposed to orally consuming something can take the longest. Nose takes quicker than orally, but it's still around the same time. Um, and then intravenous obviously is instantly,
Mm.
because injecting it into your bloodstream, right? And so the effect of a drug is magnified by how quick it enters your system. Um, and crack and cocaine is the same thing. They just take a base that allows you to smoke one, but you can't smoke the other one. It's not possible. It doesn't have the chemical reaction. It won't light, right? And so it's the
Mm.
same thing pharmacologically, but because cocaine can enter your system when smoked through crack rocks so quickly, it's intense. It's more intense, quicker, hits you harder.
Okay.
Um, and it's more instantaneous relief. So one of the reasons why people are so addicted to cigarettes, right, is because actually
Mm.
100 years ago, cigars had a lot more nicotine, um, but people weren't as addicted because you're not necessarily addicted so much to the chemical by itself as you are to the ability to remove yourself from a stressful situation legally and go sit there and smoke a cigarette to calm you down for a minute. And so that habitual practice of relieving stress instantaneously increases the addiction because you're psychologically attached to the substance that you're dependent on, right? If you're dependent on a substance, that means your body has adapted to the consumption of it. But if you're addicted to a substance, it's because your body has also adapted, but you're also kind of like psychologically attached to it. Like, I'm stressed and I know that this makes me feel better and I can get away from a stressful situation and go feel better real quick. So your body's going to be wanting you to do that more every time you're stressed, right? uh, and so that's one of the things that doesn't really get talked enough about in the conversation about drug use, right? Is the difference between dependence and addiction.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that those two themes. I'm sorry, those two things seem, I guess, similar, but obviously they're different.
Oh yeah, certainly. Like, you could have someone who's been in a hospital after a massive car wreck for 6 to 8 weeks, who's been on morphine every day, and then they get out of the hospital, and then they don't even really know what morphine addiction feels like, so they got massive headaches, and they they feel like they got the flu, and they get over it and they're fine. But if you've been consuming heroin every day, because you're drowning some sorrows, and you know that this heroin is making you feel better and it's removing your psychological trauma from the situation, then you feel like you're going to die when you get off of it. It's the same physiological effect, no difference really at all. But the mental attachment increases the anguish and makes you feel so much worse than the guy who just got out of the hospital and who goes home and doesn't have his morphine today and feels sick but doesn't know why, because no one ever told him he was a drug addict. He never even knew that he was addicted. He was just dependent on it.
Oh, okay, okay. And so the individual who's dependent, that would be the maybe temporary exposure or
Yeah, like tolerance. All that, all
okay.
dependence means like your body is tolerant. If you start consuming something, your body figures out how to understand the feeling, and adapts to it, right? You know,
Okay.
tolerance is actually a protective element. It helps protect people because you know the amount that you need and things like this. But if you're addicted and you keep trying to uh, drown some sorrows of some sort, um, and your body adapts to the feeling and starts to recognize it, your mind may be like, I need more because I can't stop thinking about this now. My body may have adapted to this medicine. Um, and so it's not drowning my sorrows as much. So I need more, and I need to keep intensifying it because I don't want to think about this or whatever the case may be. That's causing you to become compulsive in your drug use.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, man, that's a big thing to understand, um, and that's the difference between those two terms.
Certainly, the
Somebody like
hard thing.
myself who doesn't know much or better, I would readily just assume they're roughly one and the same.
Oh yeah, most people do. I mean, because we grow up in this, this is your brain on drugs, uh, you know, uh,
Uh,
concept, dog, where we didn't learn anything. I mean, I didn't learn any of this stuff until I was writing my dissertation. You
mhm,
know, I didn't know any of these things for a very long time, and I lived my life accordingly to that ignorance, which is one of the main reasons why we have the most problematic drug culture the world has ever seen. Because we don't have time to really think about these types of things, and there are entire industries built off the false assumptions about drugs in our societies today. As I was telling him at that talk the other day, there was one time where I infiltrated one of these um, drug classes that you have to take if you get in trouble, and you have to go and sit for 3 days and take this drug education course. And this person's supposed to sign off on this piece of paper to give
mhm,
you your approval. You go give it to the judge, and they let it go, and you're fine. And this dude didn't know anything about drugs. I did this in the middle of my research and my dissertation. I was already really aware. And he starts telling people in there, for example, that the Aztecs were sacrificing people because they were smoking marijuana. And I tried to explain to him that cannabis didn't make its way to the Americas until the Columbian Exchange. The Aztecs were already gone by the time uh, cannabis, drug cannabis, makes its way to the so-called New World. So what do you
mm.
mean? It's not making any sense. And his response in the middle of class was, I don't know about any of those conspiracy theories. That was his go-to response. At which point I just shut up and kept writing, and just documented all the ridiculous, absurd things that these people were scaring all these poor people around here,
Mhm.
many of which were in desperate need of a signature. Uh, and it's like it's just so much ignorant. And these are the people who got the certification to teach the class. Like, it's all built on these false assumptions, or what Richard de Grand Prix calls a cult of pharmacology, right? This mind, this cult that we have, like a cult of personality. You follow a cult of personality because some irrational thing gravitates them. People followed Stalin or Hitler because they
Mhm.
had some, cult of personality. Cult of pharmacology is kind of the same thing. We replaced our belief in magic, he argues, with pharmacology. We think that chemistry magically has an effect on you right when you put the chemical in your body, because we developed it in this age of laboratory, which was in the Enlightenment, where people were drunk on science and thinking that they had the true facts and knowledges about the world around them. And we began to systematically, like, isolate morphine, the alkaloids in the coca plant, later on the cannabinoids, all of these things within this cult of pharmacology, with making us put so much emphasis on the chemical without focusing enough on the psychological state of the person who injects a chemical, and the
Mhm.
culture that you live in that tells you what happens to you when you inject the chemical into the body, both of which are just as significant as chemistry when it comes to determining how the so-called high is going to affect you. But we like to
Mm.
just focus on the chemistry, right? We don't focus on the other two.
Yeah.
You remember a long
Huh.
time ago, I gave you a book called Ceremonial Chemistry by Thomas Sass, because there was a chapter in there
About
about
Malcolm.
Malcolm X. Uh,
Now, if you gave me the book, I still have it. It's in my office. If you didn't give
no,
me the book, you
I,
definitely sent me the
you gave
screenshot.
it back to me already. This was a
Right.
long time.
Right.
And you had read it.
Mm-hmm.
You only read that chapter because I
That
told you to read
right.
that chapter, Malcolm.
Mm-hmm.
But that book is pretty interesting as well on a larger scale. That's just one case study example about Malcolm and his perceptions of drugs, and how culturally that can affect you. Like here, you got somebody who was partaking in all this stuff growing up, living
Once a
in,
user.
right, and then he develops a sense of empowerment that is so profound, that he gets intoxicated from the lack of intoxication, right? He
Mm-hmm.
gets high off of the rejection of white society's intoxicants.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good example of how your mindset can tremendously influence um, the high that you have with or without a drug. I mean, it's you think of like placebo effects, where they kind of like influence your mindset is very much a part of all of these factors, and it's a very complex, you know, uh, symbiotic relationship between setting and chemistry. Um, but we don't like to complicate things in our society. We like to make them
Yeah.
simple.
Well, I mean, adding the variable of the mind complicates anything to almost everything because we
Right,
don't understand anything. I mean,
right,
don't get me wrong. We understand certain things about the mind. Understand certain things about the physical brain. However, the ability to measure
oh yeah.
uh, one's mental fortitude in overpowering, an intoxicant that usually overwhelms most people is difficult. It's got to be difficult, or maybe impossible.
Mhm.
Maybe impossible to ever measure one's mental fortitude to overcome an intoxicant. Um, I always wondered about, um, when you were talking about chemicals and chemistry, because there's a tendency to, in the conversations of mental health, where people say they're chemically imbalanced,
Mm.
and that if we take these drugs, it will bring balance to that force. Um, I'm not sure what type of drugs these are, like psychotropic type
Mm.
drugs or something of that nature. But I feel like there's been injected into the conversation as of lately the notion that to refer to someone as chemically imbalanced is a bit of a well, it's inaccurate, or it's dismissive because it doesn't take we don't have the measurements or the evidence to determine a chemical imbalance is actually taking place. I don't know this to be true, but this is what I've been hearing in conversation from like pundits or intellectuals and this is all surrounding the conversations that have been had or that are being had because of mental health. Are you familiar with any of that?
Of what specifically?
Well, that chemical imbalances
Oh,
may not exist,
yeah. So
or that taking these pharmaceutical drugs may not alter your this so-called chemical imbalance.
yeah, they don't always. I mean, there's a great book by Ethan Waters called "Crazy Like Us," where he studies how some of these medicines, these chemical medicines that pharmaceutical companies created within the United States, designed for U.S. Americans, then they begin to try to export these drugs and sell them in Japan, and it caused tremendously different reactions
Mm.
amongst the Japanese mind than it did the American mind. Why? Because it ain't all just about chemistry. Uh, the depends on what we mean by chemical imbalance. Like, you got sugar low in your body, you need insulin, you got a chemical imbalance,
Fair enough.
uh, right? So
Fair enough.
you if your heart's pumping, I mean, you got cholesterol that's like filling up your arteries. You need to take another chemical to reduce that, to help balance it out.
Okay.
But when it comes to neuroscience and psychology and psychiatry and psychotropic psychedelics, um, well, that is a very subjective thing. So it's difficult to call it a chemical imbalance. The best you can say is that we've looked at this person's brain on a PET scan, and it shows a lot more gray matter for someone who consumes, opiates compared to someone who doesn't. Although I don't quite know how to explain very well why that's erroneous. People, these neuroscientists of recent, uh, can measure these things and say, you can make this look that way for anything. It's like, it's very subjective. I think one of them, I can't remember who, maybe Carl Hart in his Drug Use for Grown-Ups book, where he talks about like taxi drivers, and they did these PET scans on the brain of taxi drivers, and people who drove taxis versus didn't drive taxis. You could see a difference between the brain. And are we going to say that because they drive taxis now they're somehow abnormal? The brain has become abnormal? No, it's like the body just kind of adapts to its surroundings, and when you're
Hmm.
taking images of the brain, we don't quite know what you're looking at or why it's there. I mean, it could be because they're focusing so much on something, that's increasing these types of things. Could they be a problem? Yeah, certainly. If you're constantly consuming dopamines and your body's constantly you know releasing dopamines, and you're constantly feeling good, your body's going to be adapted to it. And when you're not producing dopamines, you're going to feel bad. Um, but that doesn't mean you're like irreparable. Like, if things start getting
Mm.
bad, you can figure out ways to improve your life by um, what they call cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Um, so the notion of imbalance, I think, when you couple it with this issue of mental health in our society, is where our big problem is. Like, we have a tremendous problem with mental health, and I think we try to figure out the problem. I mean, we try to like finger point, scapegoat things that cause mental health, exaggerate mental health problems, because we have these issues with mental health. The way we talk about shrinks and all these other types of things,
Mm.
the way that a politician's job is essentially gone if they admit that they go to a psychiatrist or anything like this, or
Mm.
there's like all these disparaging sort of connections with mental health, um, in this country, that may be part of, I don't know, the way it was treated. Michel Foucault's book about the history of madness, or Madness in Civilization, talks a lot about this, about the mad, starting with lepers, where they kick people out, right? And the separation of um, people who are deemed insane, and the treatment of them. I don't know, but what I do know is that we still have a tremendous like problem when it comes to addressing these ideas of mental health without stigma or without like disparaging people. And what we know is that when you stigmatize something, you magnify it. It causes a lot more problems for the person.
Mm.
Uh, who can't
I just think it's interesting that you know, the way you were talking about how um, a particular use of a drug is different in various cultures, right?
right.
Right. And then, but it seems like the only it's it sounds like, I could be wrong, but I mean, like, if someone has diabetes in America and has diabetes in China, it won't be it won't be different in how they're diagnosed, how they're treated, or if they have type 1, they're gonna need insulin. But the brain, um, is it seems like it's the anomaly. Like, it's the one that's different. It's the one that, um, as you pointed out, that when you measure, what are you calling them, PET scans?
Yeah, yeah. PET scans.
Yeah, the PET scans of a taxi driver. For people who aren't taxi drivers, they'll come out differently. You measure, um, an American's headspace to that of a person of Japan's or Chinese headspace. It'd be different, and therefore the prescription or of the chemical in order to treat mental health issues will be different in either place. Than it would seem like, right?
Yeah, man. I wish I had time to pull up this discussion board that one of my students wrote that was really interesting. It was about cultural encounters. I tell them to pick a cultural encounter, and it kind of resonated with me because my daughter has epilepsy, and she was talking about how she had this Chinese student come live with them, uh, and her daughter had epilepsy, and the Chinese person was just like aghast that they have medicine. Like, we don't treat it with medicine this way. These are the things that we do. And I would, again, I don't know for sure. I'm gonna have to do some research, but I would be willing to bet there may be something similar to when it comes to diabetes um, and insulin. Like, in a way, we may have created a society that lends itself to require such chemicals for the person. We may have created a food system that's designed to uh, maybe have biological shifts in people to where in other cultures you won't see the need for insulin because the problem hadn't been created in the industrial revolution food system that we've developed.
Mm,
And maybe it is that there's just a smaller percentage of people with the lack of insulin in their life, and they just die from some other reason nobody knows, or maybe there's other ways to do it. I don't know, but there are certainly, according to this student, other ways to successfully treat epilepsy in China than just giving somebody the pill, right?
right.
And it sort of reminds me of like shaman medicine compared to modern medicine. How some of these things, these modern medicine people look at these shamans and like, you guys are quacks. This stuff ain't working. What are you doing? But dudes be going to the shaman doctor and it be working sometimes, right? Um, in fact, works quite often. And so there's something going on besides chemistry. It could very well be that the body and the mind have this capacity to produce
Well,
some of this stuff.
well, yeah, and that's where I think I was going with this, was that, um, you're almost kind of implying that culture plays a major role, um, in how, I guess, one's you know mentality develops, and then
Yeah.
that mentality has to therefore be treated differently, I would imagine. Um, if they have if the variable of culture is different.
Right. Right.
So if the variable of culture, and here's the problem with all that, we can't measure that. You can't. I mean, maybe I'm wrong in saying that, but and this is the difficulty of it all. Whereas other things you can measure, um, we can measure, um, one's blood. We can measure, how much insulin the body's producing. But to look at a variable such as culture and then have evidence that said culture impacts one's mentality, then that would then not be there would not be a constant um, prescription for the problem at hand.
Right.
It would always have to be this unique approach based on where you
So
live
think about like when they started to measure blood, how they came up with insulin. They could call that shit something else or whatever. I mean, everything's built on everything, right? It's like a structure. Like Thomas Kuhn and his one of the best books I think that everyone in the world has to read. Structure of the Scientific Revolutions, where he's like, every scientific model that we live in, whether you start with like the Aristotelian model, then Newton comes and Einstein, those other types of things, right? All these different scientific breakthroughs or whatever. You got some kind of thing where you get this model created. People have been measuring stuff, labeling stuff, identifying stuff, creating stuff that goes with the things that they're labeling and measuring and identifying, magnifying it all. And in each one of these models, there are things that he calls that are anomalies that don't fit, that we can't explain through the model that we have. At the beginning, you just sweep them under the rug. You don't address them. You're going for the funding. You want to produce usually results that you know are going to get funded, that are within the cultural lens. If something is too out of there, they just tend to sweep it under the rug, don't address it. But as time goes on, more anomalies keep adding up in a model and then ultimately what happens is somebody or some people will come along and they'll cause a paradigm shift, a massive shift in the structure that incorporates these anomalies into the system that you now structure that you have built, and the new anomalies come up. And so each time we like to think of this as progress. Well, we got these anomalies, we fixed it, now we're headed in this right direction. But it could very well be this self-referential loop where you got these anomalies just stacking up and you start like creating the structure that maybe points them in the same way that makes sense, that this is how to fix the problem, and you think that this is the only way, but there's probably other ways of fixing the problem.
And this is akin to what you were getting at, that in America we might have created this universal response to problems, and that would be the use of chemicals, the use of drugs,
Right.
To fix a problem. When there could be, it sounds like you're intimating that there could have been other ways,
Right.
but they're outside of our culture, so we would probably
Yeah.
never understand it.
I mean, and you know, we've mastered the power of chemicals. Maybe not mastered, but we've reached a state in which we can easily use them more efficiently, quicker, and we live in a rapid fire culture where we need everything quicker and faster, and so it fits in, and we don't question it, and you know,
That's interesting.
yeah,
Again, this is all interesting because the conversation started off with this notion that your culture has an impact on how you use or see a drug, and
definitely,
then now we're navigating the water where it's like your culture has an impact upon your mental development, which would therefore require a different prescription of a drug to address maybe like a mental health issue. Um, so culture, you know, is like
Yeah,
everything.
everything
Culture is everything.
is all, man. It's everything.
Ain't that
That's why
and
we're telling these, man. Like, I ain't biased or
what's
anything.
wild is that, but like culture is not something that is like this omnipotent just essence. It's something that we control. Like we have a part and say on the direction of said culture. It's not like it's
So,
just
yeah, to
there.
some degree. So I'm working on. It's going to be a 20, 30-year project, uh, but the title's called "Towards an Ontology of Culture." I want to make this argument that culture, for lack of a better phrase, has a mind of its own. It exists independently from human lived experience. Why? Because we live in a culture right now where we can't even possibly know all the elements of culture that we're in. They just sort of linger with us, and we tap into this storehouse of cultural knowledge at any given time to navigate through the world. And sometimes we learn about cultural developments that have been with us from the beginning. Sometimes we practice cultural um, existence without even recognizing it. Like most people can't even define what a direct object is, but you live you use it. So
Hmm.
it kind of guides you, but you also guide it. Like
Right.
you you develop it, but then it bounces back and develops you. Like we created blue
For sure.
jeans, but they became like a revolutionary symbol in the Soviet Union, right? We created Coca-Cola, but it was a act of revolution to try to have a Coca-Cola can in your hand
Hmm.
in the Soviet Union. So it's like these things. It's a hard thing to explain, but that's
That
why I
that
like.
that
Go ahead.
sounds more symbiotic than anything.
Sure,
If
sure.
that be the case,
Right.
I because I want to believe that. So when I was originally uh, getting at the notion of culture not being this omnipotent like aura or essence, you're saying that it is,
Well, not yeah. I
and
wouldn't say I agree with you on that. Not omnipotent. Like I don't think it's all powerful and all knowledge because we can influence it, but it can
right.
influence us as well. So it's got to be something on a stage lower than omnipotence, but not so low that it is completely subjected to our will.
And I also think that you don't have to be aware of something to inform something, or
Sure.
you don't have to be aware of something to have influence on something. Because I know there are a bunch of naive or ignorant individuals that have an impact on other people's lives without ever really even knowing.
Mhm.
And that they could be absent of their intent, but still make an impact. And I feel like a lot of human existence is lacking intent, but we're
Sure.
having an impact because you might hear like a phrase like people are just living aimlessly, but their life in of itself is influencing others without them ever really knowing, or influencing our environment without us really understanding the magnitude of how we're living. So I think that we can have an impact or an influence on something without ever really truly understanding every minute detail of something, as you were intimating with the notion that, culture may be too vast for us to ever really understand. But I think that as you were circling that square, we do have an impact, or we can influence it back.
Right.
It's not just us influencing us.
Right.
We can influence it back. Now, to what magnitude, I don't know, but um, I do think it's interesting. It's definitely an interesting thing. So you want to what create like a book on this? It's a 30
Yeah.
page a 30-year project already. You already know
Yeah.
it's 30 years.
I'm already like almost on the better part of a decade. and I ain't even started writing yet. You know what I mean? So I know it's gonna take 2 more decades to get that thing done. But that'd be my big philosophy of history kind of project. Once
That sounds
I'm
cool.
a real world historian and I've reached the heights, um, and can talk about these things more comfortably, and pull more knowledge from other dimensions into the conversation. But the term that sticks with me the most is this notion of the symbiotic relationship between
Mm-hmm.
the lived experience that humans have in this world and the footprint or legacy of that lived experience that somehow etches into existence after we've brought it about, and it takes on elements of its own outside of what we intended it to be. Oftentimes, once we create it, once we develop it, once we put it out there, it is now this rolling kind of thunder that just picks up things as existence goes on, and just creates newness out of people's experiences. It's like it's rolling kind of there outside of us, but then needs us. So we influence it; it influences us in a way.
Hmm. That's interesting. I'm trying to think of what I know or am aware of that operates in that capacity where um it you almost make it sound like it culture has like this gravitational pull to people, but then those people might have an impact upon whatever that gravitational object is. So it makes me think of like a planet and a moon relationship, but then the moon does have an impact upon the Earth. Um,
Definitely.
I could be wrong, but I thought I remember um, arguments being made that the moon has it has an impact upon the oceans.
Yeah,
That
it does.
that's
Sure.
certain waves will be produced by where the moon is or and what how the moon is operating. Um, and if that's the case, then yeah, that would be that would align with what you're getting at. I think this notion that um, it's dependent upon or influenced by the other. I don't know. It sounds like we're high right now.
Yeah,
Having
we
high conversations on the couch.
start thinking about that culture, man. Yeah, thinking about wild stuff. Funny, man.
But yeah, man, we're at the hour mark, believe it or not.
You know, right on. Well, I just started looking, and I had a few things come up, but we can add more. It's up to you. You can decide what you want. But one of my favorite anthropologists who wrote a book called Sweetness and Power, named Sidney Mintz, I got here, who says the single most important truth about human beings is the existence of culture.
Yeah, mm, truth is subjective, cultures are subjective or relative.
If I mean, if it's the most important truth of our existence, I mean, that tells you that it's a profound thing. Um,
Whose culture? Humanity's
Culture in
culture?
general, he says, culture is the most important truth about human
Mm,
beings. The single most important truth about human beings is the existence of culture. That's interesting because that 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 phrase doesn't imply that humans created culture. All it implies is that culture exists, and the existence of culture is the most important truth of human beings. So it kind of implies that there's a connection between the two, but it doesn't
for sure.
necessarily mean we created it.
And that'd be a great question to consider like at like the historical underground meetings, you know,
Yeah.
like after or if anyone watches this and they feel like they have an angle on that or if they have a take on that, then that'd be something that we would talk about first things, first things first in a meeting, whether or not if like if the most important truth to humanity is culture.
Existence of culture.
The exist meaning that means our culture,
The
but not
single
the
important truth about human beings is
so,
the existence of culture. Sydney
and
Smith.
cult and then it, it, it implies that there's a single definition to culture.
Not necessarily. It just means that that's the single most important truth. We'd have to
But
define what truth is.
so
So
well, okay, so either we have to define what truth is, good luck,
yeah,
or or if there is not a definitive definition for culture, well then culture is relative, and then therefore truth is relative.
yeah. But what's true about human beings? He says the most important truth about human beings, meaning um, there's a lot of things that's true about human beings. It's true that we breathe. It's true that we eat. It's true that we drink. But the most important truth is that culture exists.
Okay.
And if culture exists, it's the entire expression of life. It's what gives meaning to life. It's what gives meaning to our society. It's what we use. It's what we tap into to make sense out of our existence, which is why
Right.
it's important. Without
It's
it,
how
we're
it's
like
how it's how, it's how we see the world, which informs how we act,
right.
and
Without
that's our
it, we're
culture.
just eating, sleeping, shitting, drinking, rinse and repeat.
I'm
Right?
not mad at that.
Yeah.
Call me uncultured. I'll take that. But anyways, man, I think that's about it. Then we'll
Right
leave it at
on.
that, and then that'd be something for us to chew on. Maybe at if we get it going this next historical underground meeting.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, man.
All right, man. Take it easy.
All right, take it easy.
Peace.